everybody. Welcome into the Next Bats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We have a fantastic episode for you this week because it's time to talk a little draft. Yeah, that's right. I know we're only about halfway through the NFL season, but no better time to start diving into the prospects the Patriots should potentially be looking at, whether they've got the number one overall pick, maybe it's 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in that range. At least that's how it's looking right now. That's where they're going to be picking. And so we're bringing in our friend Dane Brugler from The Athletic, friend of the podcast. You've heard him here many, many times. Hopefully you're following him by now on Twitter, on X, at DP Brugler. Does such a great job for The Athletic. He has his top 50 in this year's draft class coming out very, very soon, so you're going to want to keep an eye out for that. But he's teasing you with a little bit of intel right here on Next Pats. Is there a receiver he would take in the top 5? Is there a lineman that he would prefer over the pass catcher? And is this a bad year to have the number one overall pick where the Patriots are slated to pick right at this very moment? Of course, that could change. But I don't think you're going to love his answer if you're sitting there saying, yes, 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 give us the number one pick, and then we'll turn that into, yes, that could turn into 5 and a future one, or that could turn into 8 and maybe pick number 24 overall. Maybe trade back up into the first round, and now you're attacking multiple sets of needs with this number one overall pick that's going to be so valuable to the rest of the NFL. It's going to bring you an absolute haul when it comes to draft capital. Yeah, maybe not so much. But before we get to Dane and all of that draft conversation, we had to go a little rogue, by the way, with Dane. Had some technological issues, and so you're not going to love the audio in all likelihood from me. So you're just going to fast forward right through my questions. You're going to do that probably on a weekly basis anyway on this very podcast, and you're going to want to listen to the expert talk about the thing where he has his expertise. Got it? Got it. Okay. Before we get there, let's talk a little Drake Maye versus Caleb Williams, because we do touch on that as well with Dane, but it's the story to focus on when it comes to this week for the New England Patriots in Week 10. They're headed out to Chicago. The Bears, believe it or not, haven't lost a game in Chicago in over a year. It's just everywhere else they happen to play where they seem to have issues. But I'm going to tell you why Drake Maye, to this point in their rookie seasons, knowing Drake Maye has far fewer attempts than Caleb Williams and far fewer games started than Caleb Williams, I'm going to tell you why he's been the better quarterback. And the answer may surprise you. It comes down to accuracy. Here are some numbers. Get a load of this. When it comes to yards per attempt, Drake Maye and Caleb Williams, very similar. Caleb Williams, 6.3. Drake Maye, 6.2. Not exactly what you're looking for, so to speak, from either guy, but they're right there in the same range. When it comes to their sack percentage, Drake Maye taking a sack on 8.2% of his dropbacks, not great, but Caleb Williams, slightly higher at 9.3. You understand why those rates are where they are right now. Neither guy, though the Bears have tried to invest in that offensive line, neither guy playing behind the best offensive line. Both players like to scramble around, try to create with their legs. Generally speaking, those types of quarterbacks have higher sack percentages. Very similar for both players, though. How about the quarterback rating? Pretty good gauge of overall quarterback play, right? When it comes to your work as a passer, at least. That's not going to factor in any of the scrambling work that either of these players has done. Quarterback rating, Drake Maye, 85.1. Caleb Williams, 83.0. How about pressure percentage? Again, a lot of times that is having to do with whatever you're working with on the offensive line, but the quarterback himself has a lot to do with just how consistently over time, especially as the sample size in the data collected gets larger and larger, quarterbacks have a lot to do with how much pressure they're actually seeing. Drake Maye's pressure percentage, 34.4. Not bad behind an offensive line that was allowing almost 50% pressures with Jacoby Brissett behind center. How about Caleb Williams? Right around the same number. Pressure percentage, 34.6. Here's where Drake Maye separates. It's really on two fronts. One good, one not so good. Let's start with the not so good. I'll give you the bad news first. His interception rate is significantly higher than Caleb Williams. 3.2% is Maye's interception rate versus 1.9 for Caleb Williams. Obviously, he just threw 2 picks, added to a strip sack. Over-aggressive attempt at the very end of that game against the Titans helps them lose it. in overtime, has another bad rep a little bit earlier in the game where his footwork gets a little wonky. We broke this down on the game plan with Brian Hoyer this week, where he is basically perpendicular to, or his hips are parallel to the line of scrimmage. A little bit early in that play, he's sensing some pressure and maybe reacting to it with a little bit too much zeal early in the down, and that helps lead to a wonky throw as he's getting hit, ends up getting intercepted. So we know he has work to do in that regard. So that's one area where Caleb Williams, you tip your cap, has the better numbers than Drake Maye. But for me, where the scales get tipped in Drake Maye's favor is with on-target percentage, and that's something that we can track now. There are a variety of different places that'll do it. I'm going to use the numbers from Sports Info Solutions, our friends at SIS in the football department specifically. When it comes to on-target percentage, and we're just looking at quarterbacks with at least 100 attempts so far this year, so there are 36 such quarterbacks. Caleb Williams is 35th in the NFL in on-target percentage. 67.4% of his passes have been deemed on target. That is ahead of only Anthony Richardson, whose completion percentage this year is 44.4. Alarmingly low. And so no surprise that his on-target number is also alarmingly low. What is surprising is that Caleb Williams is keeping him company right there at the bottom of the list. Whereas Drake Maye, his on-target percentage is 78.4. That's good for 10th in the league. And the reason why I like this list is I think it is pretty consistent with who some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL are this season. Listen to this list, and I'll just give you the top 10, and we'll finish with Drake Maye at 10 overall. Joe Burrow, on target, 84.3% of the time. Patrick Mahomes, 82.2. Justin Herbert, 80.2. Jared Goff, having an MVP caliber season, 79.4. Derek Carr, okay, maybe an outlier there, 78.9. Let's keep going. Tua Tagovailoa, 78.9. We know what he is, but generally speaking, considered a very accurate quarterback. Geno Smith, 78.9. Jalen Hurts, 78.7. Josh Allen, 78.5. And then Drake Maye. You're talking about this year's favorite for MVP. You're talking about a guy who will be and has been a favorite for MVP in Joe Burrow. You're talking about the greatest quarterback of this generation in Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen, who's going to be in the MVP discussion just about every year. And your guy, Drake Maye, on target percentage of 78.4. That to me is the biggest difference between where these two quarterbacks are to this point. And where I would even further lean in Drake Maye's favor when it comes to comparing these two players and where they're at in their careers right now, and why I would say Drake Maye is the one who's playing better football. Look at the situations. Look at what Drake Maye has to throw to. Again, neither guy. Let's call the offensive lines a wash, even though if you look at the personnel in Chicago, it should be better than what the Patriots are working with in New England. Look at the pass catchers in Chicago between DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and Cole Kmet. I mean, you've got legitimate pros, not even mentioning friend of the podcast. How could I forget? Rome Odunze out of Washington, considered one of the best pass catchers in a loaded receiver draft this past year. Somebody that Caleb Williams is going to be able to grow with. Then you have those veterans, those experienced guys that know what they're doing already, that should be helping him along in his, the early portion of his rookie year. What does Drake Maye have in comparison? He has Hunter Henry, who I probably would take over Cole Kmet, quite frankly. But outside of that, is there a single receiver from those three that I mentioned in Chicago that you wouldn't take over everyone in New England? And listen, I love Pop Douglas as much as the next guy. But he doesn't have number one upside, nor was he ever a number one, the way that I think all three of those guys that I already mentioned. DJ Moore, you could argue, has low-end number one ability. Rome Odunze, you could argue, is a future number one somewhere. If he got drafted elsewhere, he'd be probably a target monster right now. And he's actually leading the Bears when it comes to receiving yardage this year. And Keenan Allen is about as steady as they come when it comes to dependable, veteran, sure-handed, clean route runner. Not a number one, but somebody who can really help your quarterback who's the engine of any offense, continue to function effectively for a long period of time. So that's where I'm at with these two players at the moment. Both guys somewhat similar in terms of their play styles. You're going to get a lot of quote-unquote recess reps, and we're going to see a bunch of those, I'm sure, in Chicago when these two guys actually meet on the field. But there's one player who's been throwing it where he wants to throw it much more frequently than the other, and it's Drake Maye, who is the more accurate quarterback right now. If you want to dig even further into it, we could get into some of the deep passing numbers. And while Drake Maye hasn't been a superstar when it comes to pushing the ball down the field and focusing specifically on passes that travel at least 20 yards down the field, his adjusted completion percentage for those throws is 38.5. He's right in range with some other really good quarterbacks. Kyler Murray's 35.7. Patrick Mahomes this year is just 35.3 in terms of his adjusted completion percentage on passes 20 yards or more down the field. Matthew Stafford's at 32.3. So it's not like he's keeping horrible company there, Drake Maye, even though out of 40 qualifying quarterbacks, according to Pro Football Focus, he is ranking number 28. Not amazing. Caleb Williams is 38 with a completion percentage, an adjusted completion percentage, so this factors in drops. You're not being hurt by your receiver's mistakes if you're a quarterback in this category. His adjusted completion percentage, Caleb Williams' is 21.6. And Drake Maye, when it comes to PFF's big-time throws, those are their most accurate, generally speaking, down-the-field throws, tend to make a big-time impact on the game. He already has 4 big-time throws on passes that travel at least 20 yards down the field in just 28 attempts, where Caleb Williams has 5 in 37 attempts. So whether it's general accuracy or down-the-field accuracy specifically, Drake Maye's getting the check mark. And then you look at his situation versus Caleb Williams, and I think it would be hard to argue that Drake Maye isn't actually playing better than Caleb Williams right now. Now, when it comes to this game in particular, can Drake Maye take advantage of a potential weakness that the Bears' defense has exhibited over the course of this season? Now, the Bears, very good, top 10 in the league when it comes to points allowed per game, but a couple of potential weaknesses, and only one that I think that the Patriots might actually be able to take advantage of. One of their weaknesses in Chicago is an inability to stop the run. Sound familiar? The Bears might try to run it down the Patriots' throats because they've had such difficulty stopping the run themselves, but the Bears had not been able to really consistently, against good opponents, stop the run. They might be able to this week against the Patriots because they've been so bad in that regard, and because so much has had to be put on Drake Maye's shoulders with the running game being as inept as it's been. But the Bears also, surprisingly, not great at defending the deep pass this year. Let me give you a few numbers. Again, let's talk about those deep air yards types of passes. So 20 yards or more beyond the line of scrimmage in the air. The Bears are 26th in completion percentage allowed. They're averaging almost 50% of those passes to be completed against them, 45.8. Their EPA per play allowed on those deep passes, they're 23rd, and their yards per attempt on those passes, they're 23rd in the NFL. How about against specific routes? So corner routes, posts, fades, goes. This is all stuff that Sports Info Solutions tracks. They're tied for 28th in the league in terms of completion percentage allowed, 50 even. They're allowing half of those types of routes to be completed against them this year. Quarterback rating allowed, they are second to last in the NFL, 135.4 on those types of routes, corners, posts, fades, and goes. You think Drake Maye might like to try this defense deep down the field? That's sort of his game anyway, right? And so is it Kayshon Boutte down the sideline? Is it Hunter Henry on a skinny post? You know, these are the types of plays that they may be turning to this week in order to pick up some explosive gains in Chicago. Yards per play allowed on these types of routes. Again, the Bears, second to last in the NFL, 16.6 yards per attempt on those types of routes. And then EPA per play, the Bears are 30th in the NFL, third to last in the league on those specific 4 routes that I mentioned, corners, posts, fades, and goes. So you have the better quarterback in this matchup. you have the potential to allow your quarterback to do one of the things he does well, finding receivers deep down the field. Now, is anybody going to be able to get open down the field? Are they going to be able to protect him long enough to be able to try those deep strikes down the field? That I don't know. But he has been able to occasionally create explosive plays with those types of routes. Can he do it again in Chicago? The matchup, though on paper the Bears are one of the best defenses in the NFL, the matchup would indicate that there are going to be some opportunities there for Drake Maye. Okay, so there's your quarterback v. quarterback overview before Patriots and Bears. Hopefully it's an entertaining game for you all to watch. Hopefully you're continuing to see Drake Maye progress. He certainly has room to grow. Alex Van Pelt talking today. Just had a chance to talk to him down at Gillette Stadium about all the things that Drake Maye needs to improve on. His ball handling when it comes to play action fakes, ball security in general, understanding where to go with the football in certain situations, maybe situations that they haven't necessarily planned for. That's going to come up on a week-to-week basis. Defenses are going to have answers for you that you weren't anticipating. How do you react in those situations? Those are all areas Alex Van Pelt wants to see Drake Maye clean up his game. But one thing we've seen from Drake Maye is that he has shown relatively steady improvement from when we first saw him in the spring until now. And so if those are the things that they're focused on working with him right now, maybe those are areas that you start to see incremental improvement week after week after week as we make our way through the second half of the Patriots season here. Something to watch for you all this week. Now, what I really want you to watch is this interview with Dane Brugler, because he is tremendous on all things draft. He's going to tell you about the best receivers in the class. He's going to tell you about the best linemen in the class. I asked him what he would do if he was taking over the Patriots front office and they had a top 5 pick. Would he go with the pass catcher? Would he go with the blocker? Get used to this discussion, everybody, because we're going to be having this discussion for months and dissecting these names and getting to know them better and better as we get closer and closer to draft weekend in the spring. But here's a little appetizer, just a little taste for you about 6 months before draft weekend. Here's Dane Brugler.
There he is. There's our guy, Dane Brugler of The Athletic, their NFL draft analyst there at DP Brugler on the website formerly known as Twitter, now X. Dane, thanks so much for being back with us back on Next Pats here, man.
Hey, anytime. I know, I don't know if fans necessarily want to be talking draft in November, but here we are, and that's the reality that we're facing.
Exactly. They might not want to talk about draft, Dane, but they need to start talking about the draft. And we are going to talk about the draft. Nobody better to talk about that with than you. But first I wanted to ask you, because I know you just came out with your midseason all-rookie team, and you know so much about all of these guys that are so early in their careers here. But we're about to walk into Drake Maye versus Caleb Williams this coming weekend in Chicago. I'm headed out there in a couple of days. What have you made of the starts to the season for these two guys? And would you maybe alter who you would take first if given the opportunity based on what you've seen from those two players to this point in the season? I know you had Caleb Williams ranked ahead of Drake Maye last year.
Yeah, well, I think we saw this a couple weeks ago when we got the Bears and Commanders and Caleb versus Jaden Daniels. And so it'll be interesting when they're going head to head, not on the field at the same time, but still a chance to compare them on the same field. The Bears' operation on offense is really convoluted right now. And like when you watch that game against the Commanders, I don't think you saw one quarterback that was clearly better than the other, but you saw an offense that was clearly better than the other. And so now it'll be interesting with the Bears and the Patriots. How will we see one of these quarterbacks clearly outplay the other? Or maybe it's just one of the offenses outplaying the other, because with the Bears, they have better talent, especially at receiver, than what the Patriots have. But I think, based on what the tape has said, you could argue that the offense and their plan for their quarterback has been better in New England. And, give Drake Maye a lot of credit. I don't think he got enough credit during the process for his ability to work on the move, use that athleticism. I mean, it's all over his tape. He led North Carolina in rushing as a sophomore. So it shouldn't be any big surprise that he's been so good with his legs, extending plays. Some of the reckless decisions are still there. And I think that's part of Drake Maye, and with experience that'll get better. But he, over the last 2 years in the college level, he had more 10+ yard plays than any other quarterback except Jaden Daniels. So he is someone that will rely on his legs to get himself out of trouble, buy extra time to throw, or take off and run. And we've seen that so far be something that's been an important part of his game in the NFL. So no surprise there. The sample size just haven't been big enough to, I think, drastically alter how you would rank these guys. But over the second half of the season, that's certainly something that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch those guys play against each other, share the field this coming Sunday, and then sort of track their progress as they make their way not only through the second half of their rookie seasons, but throughout these first 2 or 3 years of their career and see where they end up. Let's talk a little draft now, Dane. The Patriots, unfortunately for them, or fortunately, I think, depending on which fan you might ask, they are currently scheduled to pick number 1 in the 2025 NFL draft. And what I want to ask you is this a bad year to have the number 1 overall pick if you already have your quarterback of the future?
It's never a bad thing to have the number 1 overall pick in a draft because there's always going to be good players to choose from. But relatively speaking, I think you could say that because we saw 2 years ago the haul that the Bears got for the Panthers to go up and take Bryce Young. That there's just not going to be those type of trade offers in this draft. I mean, there always could be. You never know. If a team is desperate enough and there's directions from ownership on down saying, "Hey, go get us a quarterback." You never know that we could see something like that. But on the surface, with what we know right now, that's just not how it looks. That's not how NFL teams are talking about these guys, talking about these quarterbacks, talking about this draft. But again, it's never if you enter the draft with the first pick compared to the 15th pick, you're at an advantage compared to the team picking later because you have a chance to take the best player on your board. And in my opinion, the best player in this draft is Travis Hunter from Colorado, the wide receiver / corner, can play both ways. It'll be interesting how that is talked about throughout the process. Every team's going to look at it a little bit differently. I would love for him to be my starting corner, and then you mix in 10, 15, 20 plays a game on offense. I think to me that makes the most sense. But I think he is worthy of that number 1 overall pick. Whereas with the quarterback position, you just don't have some teams like Cam Ward from Miami, some teams like Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. But they're not being talked about as, oh, yeah, the number 1 overall pick, pencil it in right now. That's just not how teams see these guys.
It's really interesting because it does feel like when those guys exist, about them over a year before the draft, never mind, 6 months before the draft or wherever we're at right now. Caleb Williams and Drake Maye, they were presumed the top 2 guys in the 2024 draft class long before the draft ever arrived. So it feels like with that quarterback maybe not being there at the very top, the Patriots trade options, if you're a Patriots fan out there and you're hoping, well, they'll just trade back from 1 and they could end up with 4 and 21, that kind of deal probably isn't going to be there for them in all likelihood.
If I'm the Patriots, I am, because I think right now with where we sit, it's early November. Cam Ward from Miami is the favorite to be the first quarterback drafted. That's not a consensus view, but it is the majority of teams that I talk to. That is kind of where they lean. Now, some of those teams don't need a quarterback, and so maybe they're not looking at it with as critical of an eye. But I think that's where the vibe is right now. Cam Ward is the favorite, and so if I'm a Patriots fan, I'm rooting for Cam Ward to finish out the season strong, go into the college football playoff, and play his butt off. And all of a sudden, maybe we do see him rise a little bit, and we're talking about him as, all right, we're going to auction off this pick, chance to go get Cam Ward. Maybe we get there. But I think that we're not there yet. We still have to see how the next 2 months play out.
Okay, you mentioned Travis Hunter, and you like him, it sounds like, primarily as a corner. The Patriots seem okay at corner for the time being, at least, Dane, with Christian Gonzalez as their top guy. Would you ever draft him to be a receiver only? And if he was, would you consider him a legit number 1? Is this the kind of guy who could come in and win in one-on-one coverage and be that guy who gets open for you on 3rd and 8 and creates explosive plays for you? Do you envision that kind of future for him offensively?
I think as a cornerback, he is worthy of the number 1 overall pick. As a receiver, he's still in the top 10, but it's maybe not as much of a slam dunk at 1. It's not a slam dunk. Okay, like like if Malik Neighbors were in this draft, I think he would be the number one overall pick in this draft. And I said that a year ago at this time. Malik Neighbors just happened. He was my third overall player last year. He just happened to be in a draft with Caleb and Marvin Harrison and guys that were at the top as well. So Travis Hunter's with his suddenness, his speed, his ball skills, he's going to be a really good wide receiver if he chooses to play, or the team that drafts him wants to play him on that side of the ball. But he's 6 foot, 180 pounds, maybe doesn't have that body type that necessarily ideally you want at that position, at least for a guy you're taking number one overall. But he's a very good player. And I think that he is going to be, he's the favorite to be the first non-quarterback drafted. And I'd be surprised if he's not a top 3 pick when it's all said and done.
If it's not him, is there another receiver that you would take ahead of him if you were looking truly for a full-time offensive guy? Like if you're the Patriots right now, I think the 2 most obvious positions that they need, that they should be most interested in at the top of the draft would be receiver or tackle. Is there anybody else? Is it the receiver from Arizona? Is there anybody else who's even in that conversation with Hunter as maybe being the best receiver in this class?
Yeah, well, my top 50, I did a top 50 in August, and my updated top 50 comes out here in a few days. But I'll tease it a little bit here. Travis Hunter is my number 1 overall player, and T-Mac at Arizona is at number 5. So there's not this drastic gap between these 2 players. McMillan's a little bit different. He's 6'5", 212 pounds, has Gumby-ish movements. He's just so flexible and fluid as a mover. Elite tracking, high pointing skills. Ball skills are probably what he does best. He's not the route runner that, say, like a Marvin Harrison Jr. was last year. But, even though Arizona is not having a great year, he's still the first player in college football to go over 1,000 receiving yards. So this guy just produces. I think he's going to be somewhere in that top 10 mix and has the makings of a number 1 type receiver in the NFL. Big fan of T-Mac and what he brings. Some teams like Luther Burden from Missouri also in that top 10 mix. He's not going to be as productive this year with some of the quarterback issues they have at Missouri. But, he's in that mix as well. So, even if we talk about, if the Patriots end up with, say, the 6th pick overall and say they just miss on Hunter and T-Mac, Luther Burden's a player that teams are really excited about because he's more in that Amon-Ra St. Brown type of bucket as a receiver where you want just getting him the football and let him create, whether it's crossers over the middle, screens. He can still win vertically. He has that type of speed, but he's almost like a running back after the catch. He can break tackles. He can make guys miss. He's a fun player with the ball in his hands. So this draft isn't necessarily last year when you talk about the receivers with Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas. I think if Brian Thomas was in this draft, if he stayed for a senior year at LSU, he's probably the first receiver drafted this year. He was that type of talent. This draft at receiver isn't last year, but there's still some really quality, talented receivers at the top.
It sounds like, and I'd be interested to read whenever it comes out your top 50 and just see where these guys rank. But it sounds like there are a couple offensive linemen in this year's draft that feel like the top tackles. Although I know one of them is somebody that you sort of see and maybe teams sort of see as a guard primarily. But if you're running the Patriots front office, Dane, and you have a top 5 pick, are you going with one of those receivers you just mentioned, or is it Will Campbell from LSU? Is it somebody else to play on the offensive line, especially having a decent idea of what Drake Maye might be in year 2 and beyond?
Yeah, I think that if I'm GM, I'm relying on my scouts and my team around me to help me figure out which one of these is the better route to go because I don't think there's a slam dunk answer. Will Campbell from LSU, left tackle. I mean, he started from at left tackle the moment he showed up at LSU. This guy was born to be an offensive lineman. He has that mentality. He's a smart player. He's very physical, finishes through the whistle. He doesn't have ideal length. And that's kind of the question mark. Will he be long enough for teams to trust him on the outside? And so, what his arm length is at the combine, there'll be a lot of interest in that. Does he get to that 33 number, or is he more 32 and 3/4? Is he 32? Is he under 33, or is he over 33? That is what a lot of teams will be looking for. But and when you watch him on tape, he has really good tape, except there are a few times where you just wish he were a little bit longer. I saw it against Landon Jackson on the Arkansas tape, a really talented pass rusher who has a chance to be a first-round pick this year. You watch him against Texas A&M's offensive line or defensive line, one of the best defensive lines in college football. That's where he struggled a little bit, just to a little bit to the point where creates a little bit of doubt in your mind. But right now, Will Campbell, to me, the best offensive lineman in this draft. And then Kelvin Banks right behind him at Texas, who, again, just like Will Campbell, there's questions about, do you leave him at tackle? Do you move him inside at guard? Teams are split on that. And so you look at Banks, he's another guy that moves pretty well. He maintains leverage, creates force through his body mechanics, just understands the position really well. He's on the ground more than you want, but the tools are there for him to start at the NFL level. It's just about where do you feel comfortable playing him. And I think teams are going to be split on this. There won't be a consensus. He's definitely a tackle, definitely a guard. And so those would be the first two offensive linemen. And then for me, the next two guys after that are definite tackles. You have Josh Simmons at Ohio State, who, based on the first month of the season, he would have been in the conversation for OT1, injured his knee against Oregon, out for the year. All of a sudden, his draft projections in limbo because we don't know enough about the injury, enough about the timeline. And so all of a sudden we're kind of left, in limbo with Josh Simmons about where he's going to end up. Does he even enter this draft? He's a junior, could go back to Ohio State. We'll see. And then Cameron Williams from Texas, the other tackle at Texas, starting at right tackle. There's some similarities to Amarius Mims because he's not picture perfect. He doesn't have a ton of starts on his resume. But he's not polished. He's noticeably raw. But again, for a guy that's looks like that, 6'5", 335 pounds, to be able to move like he does, have that strength, have that upside, teams will be willing to bet on that at some point in the first round. So this is a tackle class that it's not on par with last year. There's no Joe Alt in this year's draft. You could argue there's no J.C. Latham. Last year was so loaded at the tackle position. This year there's definitely a gap. There's a drop off in tackle play, but that doesn't mean there's not good players. It's just teams are gonna have to maybe work a little bit harder to figure out, okay, which one is the best of this group.
It's going to be so interesting over the course of the next several months here. If you're the Patriots, you're probably hoping, to your point from earlier, that one of these quarterbacks just sets the world on fire and rockets up draft boards, and some team gets desperate and wants to pull the trigger on that guy at number 1 overall, if that's the pick the Patriots have. Or you're hoping one of them separates themselves at either receiver or tackle, just so you make sure you get a star level player at that position. I know it's asking a lot, but the Patriots are so lacking in talent, Dane, across the board, offensively especially, that, boy, it would be really disappointing if they're in the top 5 there somewhere and they draft a guard. And it's just that's just the best they can do because of where they're at and the talent available to them. I think that would be pretty disappointing. But like you said, there's time for these opinions on all these guys to change a little bit and for them to perform better.
And again, I think this is a draft where there's just not going to be a ton of consensus from team to team. I think, like I said, Travis Hunter is, to me, the favorite to be that first non-quarterback drafted. But after that, I think it's really up in the air. Teams like one of these pass rushers, whether it's McKell Williams from Georgia or James Pierce, Tennessee, Abdul Carter, Penn State, or is it one of the defensive backs? Will Johnson from Michigan is a really good player. Malachi Starks from Georgia, safety. We're going to have a safety that's going to be in the top 12 picks again this year, which is, we don't see that a lot, but Starks is worth it. He, in terms of his football IQ, in terms of his athleticism, he belongs in that mix. And then we've got some hybrid guys like Jalen Walker from Georgia, really good linebacker, but he's an edge rusher. So this is a draft where there's going to be a lot of differing opinions from team to team. And in terms of where you draft him, is he really worth a top 5 pick? There's a lot of those questions going on. So yeah, this will be a lot of, it's going to be different than last year, but it'll still be interesting because of the names at the top and how teams will view them. And I mean, how many teams do we have that are fighting for that number 1 overall pick? I mean, there feels like there's like 7 teams that have 2 wins right now. I mean, it's going to be interesting how this plays out over the next 2 months.
No question about it. Dane Brugler from The Athletic at DP Brugler on X. Fantastic insight as always, buddy. Thanks so much for being with us.
Anytime. Thanks, Phil.
Great stuff there from Dane Brugler. Thanks so much to him. Thanks so much to all of you for listening. Please, if you haven't already, rate, comment, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Trying to keep this thing going, give you the best product we can possibly give you. If you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate you as well. We salute you apparently as well. That just happened. I wasn't even controlling my arm as I did that, but there I am saluting you once again. Leave a comment there. Hit subscribe. Hit the old thumbs up button as well. Whatever you can click on there, just go ahead and click it because I think it's going to help our podcast. And if you leave a comment, I love to jump in and go back and forth with the people there as well. So we will talk to you there. We will talk to you if we see you in Chicago. If you're out there, give me a shout. We'll be on the field. Pre-game live, we'll be on the field. Post-game as well. Hopefully everybody has a fantastic time watching this game. Win or lose for the Patriots, right? Let's be honest here. Nobody's expectations are all that high, even going against a not-so-great Chicago team on the road. I'm not going to be picking the Patriots to win this weekend, but maybe you see your quarterback improve, and maybe you see your quarterback make a little magic the way he did in Nashville a week ago. I think we all would take those moments as we get into the second half of the year here for the Patriots in 2024. Thanks again. Love you, mean it. We'll talk to you next week.